Good morning.
In unison, good morning.
In unison, good morning, Your Honor.
Are you all feeling like I am?
Probably.
That damn time change. Laughter. All right, counsel. Call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We still have Jesus Salas on the stand.
Please be seated. You're still under oath.
Good morning, Mr. Salas.
Good morning.
I'm not sure exactly where I left off, but I'd like to begin by going back to generalities about Neverland. As far as your relationship with Mr. Jackson concerning your employment as house manager, can you characterize the level of control that Mr. Jackson maintained over Neverland and over the main house?
I would say pretty high.
And as far as in terms of how demanding he could be, could you characterize that as well?
Objection. Vague. Foundation.
Sustained.
I can be more specific. How demanding he was about the level of his service that was provided to him by his employers.
Objection. Vague. Foundation.
Sustained.
Who was it that determined what? Which guests? Well, let me back up. How was it determined, if you know, whether a guest would be coming to Neverland or not?
I did not know that.
Okay. And would guests of Neverland be allowed to bring their own guests to Neverland? Do you know?
Objection. Calls for speculation. Foundation.
If you know.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
I do not know that either.
Okay. The guests of Neverland would be whose guests?
Objection. Foundation. Calls for speculation.
Foundation is sustained.
Do you know if people were allowed on Neverland without Mr. Jackson's permission?
I believe that if they weren't allowed by Mr. Jackson, I don't think they would come in.
Okay. And do you know who would determine how long a guest was allowed to stay at Neverland?
Objection. Foundation. Calls for speculation.
It's a foundational question.
You may answer that, yes, or no.
I believe they didn't have no time.
Just a moment. He's just asking if you have the knowledge. He's not asking you what the knowledge is. Do you know who determined how long a guest could stay? Yes or no?
No, I didn't.
How were children treated at Neverland?
Objection. Vague. Foundation.
Sustained.
Can you, when you were at Neverland, Mr. Salas, when you were house manager, did you observe at any time Mr. Jackson with child guests?
Yes, I did.
And did Mr. Jackson ever inform you of the level of the service he expected of his child guests?
Objection. Leading. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
He always expected the best, to be treated the best.
If a child wanted something at Neverland, had a request, or let's say food, a movie, any special request of that nature, would that request be fulfilled by the employees?
Objection. Vague. Foundation. Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Yes.
Do you know if that's the way Mr. Jackson wanted it?
That is correct.
How do you know that?
Because of what he told me, that, whatever the guests needed, we needed to provide that for them.
And did you notice whether or not this level of service or treatment as far as the children went? Did you notice if it affected those kids' behavior in any way?
Objection. Vague. Foundation.
Sustained.
Did you ever have a chance to observe the children? Well, let me ask you this. Were the children basically given whatever they wanted?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Mr. Salas, please characterize for me, if you would, in general, the level of service and, well, I think you've said before that the children were allowed the best treatment, the best service, true?
That is correct.
Give me an example. What are you talking about when you say that?
Well, the best service I'm talking about, if they wanted to see a movie and have their meal at the theater or any of that kind of stuff, I would make sure that they would get it that way. Or if they wanted to eat like anywhere else, if they wanted to eat. If guests called me, or the kids called me, they wanted to eat in the train depot, I would make sure that that's where they get their meal, or whatever they asked for.
If they wanted candy, were they given candy?
Absolutely.
If they wanted to play at the amusement park, could they do it?
Absolutely.
Were there any rules about that?
No.
As far as when and how they would play.
Well, there was some rules, for their safety,
Yes.
Yes. But other than that, there wasn't any other rules.
Did you have golf carts at Neverland?
Yes.
Were the children allowed to use them?
There was some kids that they were allowed to use them.
Who decided who got to use the golf carts?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Are you aware who allowed the children these privileges of using the golf carts?
I had some control on that. We had security or we'd have security there. Many times kids, they were told they weren't allowed to drive certain cars, but they were some kids that they were allowed to drive them.
If Mr. Jackson said, "Let this kid drive a golf cart," would that kid be allowed to drive the golf cart?
I would say yes.
Tell me about the theater at Neverland. Could you describe it for me?
Well, it's a full-sized theater with a candy bar, ice cream. It's got pretty much anything that a kid can enjoy.
Are there any unusual features as far as where you can watch the movie?
Objection.
Yes, there's an upstairs.
Just a moment.
Vague and foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Go ahead.
There's an upstairs room where people can sit up there and watch the movie if they want to.
Are there any beds in the theater?
Yes, there's 2 rooms downstairs with 2 facilities for kids that they can sit in there or lay in bed and watch a movie, if that's what they want.
Is the theater ever closed? I mean, does it have hours, I guess is my question? Is it?
Pretty much when Mr. Jackson is on the property, we always kept the place open.
When he had some what?
When Mr. Jackson is on property.
I see.
We pretty much keep the place open for guests or himself.
All night long?
All night long.
Was there one person who made all the main decisions about what happened at Neverland?
Well, there is the ranch manager there.
Yes. And was there one person in charge of the ranch manager?
Yes.
And did that person make all the main decisions at Neverland?
Yes, I believe so.
And who was that?
That would be Mr. Jackson.
Now, you spoke a little bit last week about Mr. Jackson's room. Was there, I believe you testified there was a combination to get in that room?
Yes, I did.
Was that combination ever changed?
Not too often, but yes, it did.
How often would that combination change?
I believe the time that I was there, I think it was about 2 times that we changed it.
Okay. Now, when you say you were there, are you referring to the time? The full 20 years you were there, or just the year or so that you were house manager?
Just when I was the house manager.
And was there a combination to get into the main house?
Yes, there was.
And would that ever change?
That one got changed more often.
How often, if you could tell us?
I would say that we changed that about every 2 months, somewhere along that.
Do you know if certain people were given the combination to Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Not to my knowledge.
Do you know if certain people were given the combination to the Jackson house, the main entry into the home?
Yes. Pretty much all his guests have access to the house, so they had to have the combination.
And who would give them that combination?
Myself personal.
Okay. Alright. Could we have the input for, Your Honor? Alright. Mr. Salas, I show you People's Exhibit number 20. We've shown this to you before. You've identified it as Frank Tyson. You mentioned that at some point during your employment, Mr. Tyson. You mentioned something about a problem with Mr. Jackson that Mr. Tyson had. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I did.
How do you know about that problem?
I believe about Mr. Jackson's frustrations.
Okay. You were present when Mr. Jackson expressed some from frustrations?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us what he was frustrated about?
Objection. Foundation.
I'll withdraw and risk.
Okay.
Did Mr. Jackson tell you what he was frustrated about? That's yes or no.
Yes.
What, did Mr. Jackson tell you what was frustrating him?
He did not know about Frank bringing people at Neverland Valley without his permission.
Okay. Bringing guests without Mr. Jackson's permission?
Yes.
Who was it that informed Mr. Jackson of this issue?
I don't know.
Okay. And you have previously identified People's Exhibit 35 as the Arvizo family, is that right?
That is correct.
You recall the time when the Arvizo family visited Mr. Jackson in the year 2003?
Yes.
Was this frustration that Mr. Jackson expressed with Mr. Tyson before, or after, or during the time that the Arvizo family was present at Neverland in 2003?
That was after the family was there.
After the family left?
Yes.
Alright. I show you People's Exhibit number 17. You've previously identified this individual as Dieter. Tell me, when was the first time you met Mr. Dieter? Do you know his last name? Maybe I'll ask you that question first.
No, I don't remember his last name.
We'll just refer to him as Dieter. When was the first time you met Dieter?
I believe it was early or mid-2002.
Okay. And where did you meet him?
I met him at Neverland Valley.
Can you tell me about the circumstances? How is it that you met him, under what circumstances?
Well, he came to the ranch as a guest, and stayed there for a while. That's how I met him.
Okay. So, we're in mid-2002. Dieter comes and visits. Do you know how long he visited for?
Not exactly sure, but I believe he stayed there for a couple of weeks the first time he came.
Was Mr. Jackson there at the time?
Yes, he was.
Was Mr. Jackson there before Dieter came on the property, if you recall?
I don't remember.
When Dieter left the property, do you know if Mr. Jackson left with him?
I'm not exactly sure if they did, but there was a few times that they left together.
Okay. So Dieter visited the property again after that first time?
Yes.
How many times, if you can estimate?
Not exactly sure, but he came, I don't know, maybe about 3 or 4 times after that. Something like that.
Alright. And you said that, some of those times. Do you know how many times Mr. Jackson left with him, when Dieter left?
I don't.
Do you know how many times Dieter arrived on the property with Mr. Jackson, if at all?
I would say about a couple times.
Show you People's Exhibit 18, which you've identified as Ronald. Do you know Ronald's last name?
I believe his last name is Conister.
Conister?
Something like that.
Okay. We'll refer to him as Ronald. When was the first time you met Ronald?
It was at the same time I met Dieter.
Did Dieter come on the property with Ronald in that period, the first visit he came?
They both came together.
Did they leave together?
Yes.
And when, did Ronald ever come back to the property after that?
Yes, he did.
How many times?
He came back I believe about another couple times.
And during the times that he visited the ranch, did Ronald ever come to the ranch with Mr. Jackson?
I believe he came once, if I can recall.
Did he ever leave the ranch with Mr. Jackson?
I'm going to say no on that one.
Okay. And while Ronald was on the property, I think you said the first time Ronald came with Dieter, and they were there the entire time together, is that right?
That is correct.
During those subsequent visits of Ronald, was Dieter on the property?
Yes, he was.
Did you ever see these two men together?
Yes.
How often?
Daily basis.
Daily basis?
Uh-huh.
Did you ever see these two men with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I did.
How often?
Oh, I'm going to say at least they try to have a meeting once a day.
Do you know what let me back up. Do you know what Dieter's relationship was to Mr. Jackson?
No, I don't.
Do you know if it dealt with friendship, business, or a combination?
I would say it was more business.
Why do you say that?
Because of what they were discussing about business in Europe.
You heard them talking about business?
Yes.
What about Ronald? How would you characterize Ronald's relationship on the same continuum?
Same category.
Mostly business?
Mostly business.
During the time that the Arvizo family was on the property, was at Neverland in 2003, did you ever observe Ronald on the property at the same time?
Yes.
How about Dieter?
The same.
And how long were they on the property when the Arvizos were there, if you know, or can estimate?
I'd say about 2 weeks.
Is that 2 weeks total, one continuous time, or 2 weeks total different times?
It was one continuous time.
What about Frank? Was he on the property during the period of time in 2003 when the Arvizo family was on the property?
Yes, he was.
And about how much, same question, about how much time was he on the property when the Arvizos were there?
Well, he was living there. He was all the time there.
Okay, so whenever the Arvizos were on the ranch, Frank was there?
Yes.
Have you ever heard of an individual by the name of Malnick? Malnick?
Yes, I did.
Was he a visitor? Was that a man?
Yes, it's a man.
Did you meet him?
Yes.
Was he ever a visitor at the ranch?
At the time that I was there, he only came once, I believe.
For how long?
I don't know. A couple weeks.
Was that time that Mr. Malnick visited the ranch? Did that coincide with any time that the Arvizos were there?
Yes.
I'm showing you People's Exhibit 3. You didn't know this individual's name last week. But you did recognize him. Was this individual on the ranch at any time during the period that the Arvizos were at Neverland?
I don't believe he was there around that time.
Okay. Do you remember if he was there? You did testify that he had been at Neverland before?
Right.
Was he there before or after the Arvizos were there, if you recall?
I don't recall. He was there before.
Alright. Do you know an individual by the name of Zia?
Yes.
Who is Zia?
My understanding, he is a lawyer.
Have you met him?
Yes, I did.
Where did you meet him?
At the ranch.
Do you know who he works for?
Not exactly. My understanding, he was working for Mr. Jackson.
Was Zia, well, let me back up. How many times did Zia visit Neverland where you saw him there?
I saw him there a couple of times.
Did any of the time that Zia was on Neverland, did that coincide with any of the time that the Arvizos were there in 2003?
Yes.
Did you ever see Zia during that period of time when he was visiting the ranch in 2003 talking with Mr. Jackson?
I believe, yes, they did have a meeting one time.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Arvizos, okay? In 2003, what members of the Arvizo family were visiting Neverland?
It was just the kids and the mother.
Okay, so the three children, Devellin, Star, Gavin, and the mother.
And the mother.
Do you know her name?
Janet.
Okay. Did you participate in bringing them to Neverland in any fashion on that visit, first visit, in 2003 I'm talking about?
Yes, I picked them up at Santa Barbara Airport.
Okay. And was Mr. Jackson with them at that time?
Yes.
And you drove to Neverland Ranch?
That is correct.
Now, you testified that you would stay very late pursuant to your employment at Neverland.
Yes.
And you'd arrive pretty early, around 7 o'clock, I think you said?
That is correct.
Were you in a position to see who spent the night in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes, I was aware of who was sleeping there.
Okay. And during the time that the Arvizo boys, or let's say the Arvizo children, were at Neverland Ranch, can you tell me where the two boys would sleep?
Objection. Vague as to time.
I'm talking about the period in 2003. The visit in 2003.
I repeat the objection. It's vague.
Sustained.
In 2003, you said that you brought the Arvizo family to Neverland. How long did they stay on that particular visit?
Not exactly sure how long they stayed. But I would say they stayed a week or two, something like that.
And did they then left the ranch for a period of time?
Yes.
How long did they leave the ranch for, before they came back?
I would say about another 2 weeks.
Okay.
Something like that.
And then when they came back to the ranch, how long did they stay?
That time, I believe they stayed about another, I would say, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Somewhere around there.
Alright. When they left that time, did they return to the ranch?
Yes, they came once again.
Okay. And how long did they stay the third time?
About another week.
Okay. When they left the third time, how long did they ever return to the ranch?
That was the last time I saw them.
Okay. Now, this period of these visits that you've just described, of visiting the ranch, leaving, visiting, leaving, visiting, and visiting one third time, over what period of time did all of these visits take, if you can estimate in terms of weeks, months? How many weeks or months did it take for all of these visits to take place?
I would say about 5 weeks, something like that.
Alright. Now, tell me how detailed your recollections are about exact dates and exact periods of time concerning this, the visits by the Arvizos.
I don't remember the dates, okay.
Okay.
It's just.
Are you giving us your best estimates?
That is the best.
Are you exactly sure about the time periods and the amount of time?
I'm pretty sure about the time of them being there, but not exact.
When you say, the time, do you mean the dates, or the amount of time?
The amount of time.
Okay, so during this period of time these 3 visits that you talked about that the Arvizos visited Neverland, was Mr. Jackson there during that period of time?
Yes, he was.
Do you know if he was there the entire time or if he had periods where he was gone?
I would say that he was there most of the time. Pretty much all the time.
Okay. Are you sure whether or not do you have a specific recollection of whether he left or not and came back? Do you know?
I don't.
During the time, these 3 visits, during that period of time in which Mr. Jackson was on the property, on Neverland. Okay. Can you tell me where the Arvizo boys slept?
Again, vague as to time. Vague as to what visit. Vague as to what portion of the visit.
Sustained.
I can tighten that up. Let's do them one at a time, okay? We'll do the first one. During the first visit in 2003 of the Arvizo family, during the period of time that Mr. Jackson was on the property, can you tell me where the Arvizo boys slept?
There was times that they slept in the guest house. Okay. There were times that they sleep with Mr. Jackson.
Okay. And during the time during this second visit when they left and came back, can you tell me, during that second visit, where did the Arvizo boys sleep?
That would be about the same. They sleep with Mr. Jackson. Most of the time I believe that they were trying to sleep with Mr. Jackson.
And same question for the third visit.
And that's going to be the same answer.
Okay. Now, you said that they had a guest room.
That is correct.
Let me ask you, first of all, while you were house manager, did you notice if any other children slept in Mr. Jackson's room, other than the Arvizos?
There was some other kids.
Was it unusual for a kid who was sleeping in Mr. Jackson's room to also have a guest room?
No, not really.
Did you see Mr. Jackson interact with these children who spent the night in his room?
Objection. Vague.
Foundational question.
Overruled. You may answer.
He would spend time, because he would play with them.
And I'm just talking about the year that you were house manager. While you were house manager, how often would he play with these children?
I would say any time that he had some spare time he would play with the kids.
Okay. Would it be, you tell me, would it be daily?
He would try to be with them daily.
As far as the children visiting the ranch, did you notice whether or not Mr. Jackson appeared to form any special bonds with certain children?
Objection. Vague. Foundation.
Sustained.
Over the period of time, and I'm talking just about the time that you were manager of the ranch, you mentioned that you would see the children play with Mr. Jackson, true?
That is correct.
Where would you see them play?
Well, they would go to the park. They would go for a walk. They would go bike riding. Or they have quads, and they would ride the quads everywhere.
Quads. What are quads?
The four-wheelers.
Those are motorized vehicles?
Right.
Did you see them in the house?
Yes.
Did you see them having meals together?
Yes, I did.
Would you see this on a daily basis?
Pretty much.
So over that period of time, did you notice whether or not he formed any special bonds with certain children?
Objection. Vague and foundation.
Sustained.
These children who spent the night in Mr. Jackson's room, did they share any common characteristics?
Objection. Vague. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Go ahead and ask me the question again.
Okay. The question is, the children that spent the night in Mr. Jackson's room that you've talked about, did they share anything in common, any common characteristics?
Vague. Foundation. Objection.
Did they have anything in common? Sorry.
All right. Objection sustained.
Do you know if these children, whether or not, did you notice the age of these children?
They were around 10, 11. Around that age.
Did you notice what gender they were?
No, I don't.
Did you notice whether they were boys or girls?
Well, yes, they were mostly boys.
Did you ever see anyone else sleep in Mr. Jackson's room other than these children?
Pretty much it was just the boys. That's about it.
You previously testified that there was alcohol on Neverland, true?
That is correct.
And I think you said you were somewhat responsible for stocking the alcohol at Neverland as house manager?
That is correct.
Did Mr. Jackson drink?
Yes, he did.
Are you aware of what his drinks of choice were, what he liked to drink, in terms of alcohol?
Well, he drank wine and vodka also.
Okay. Where was the wine stored on the property?
Most of the wine, it was in the wine cellar. We also have wine in the house.
Where in the house?
In the refrigerators.
In the kitchen area?
Right.
And the vodka, where was that kept?
In the kitchen.
Okay. Was it any secret at Neverland that Mr. Jackson drank alcoholic beverages?
Objection. Vague. Calls for speculation. Foundation.
Sustained.
Mr. Salas, were you ever told by anybody that Mr. Jackson's drinking was to be concealed from anybody?
Objection. Hearsay. Foundation.
Sustained.
On which basis, Your Honor?
Hearsay.
Did you see Mr. Jackson drinking at Neverland?
I never saw him drinking.
Have you ever seen him exhibiting the effects of drinking?
Yes.
On how many occasions?
Well, lately it was on a pretty much regular basis.
A regular basis?
Right.
Did you ever see Mr. Jackson where he appeared to have been drinking a great deal, that he appeared to be drunk?
Yes.
Did you ever see him appear to be drunk? Well, let me ask you this. Was there ever any effort that you saw to conceal this fact that Mr. Jackson had been drinking? That he was drunk, to conceal that fact from his children?
Objection. Vague. Leading. Foundation.
Foundation. Sustained.
Mr. Salas, when you saw Mr. Jackson when he was drunk, did you ever see him in that condition, in the presence of his children?
Yes, I did.
On more than one occasion?
Yes.
Can you tell me how many or approximate?
Well, I couldn't tell you exactly how many times, but it was quite a few times.
During that period of time, and tell me, let's get time specific here. What time frame are we talking about? Is this when you were house manager?
That is correct.
During that period of time, did you ever see Mr. Jackson make any effort to conceal his condition from his children?
Objection. Vague. Foundation. Calls for speculation.
I'm going to allow an answer to that question. But again, it's a foundational question. So it can only be answered, yes, or, no. I'll have the court reporter read it back to you. We're asking, do you have this knowledge? Record read.
Can you ask me the question a different way?
Sure. My question is, during the period of time when you saw Mr. Jackson when he was drunk in the presence of his children, did Mr. Jackson do anything to hide the fact that he had been drinking or that he was drunk when that occurred, when you saw that?
Same objection.
Overruled. You may answer.
Not to my knowledge.
You said that wine is stored in the wine cellar. Is there any hard liquor that's ever kept in the wine cellar?
Yes.
What kind of hard liquor?
There's some whiskey, I believe. Some tequila. Pretty much that's it.
And was there whiskey and tequila in the wine cellar during the time that the Arvizo children were there in 2003?
Yes.
Did you ever see kids go into the wine cellar? Any kids, during your period of time as house manager?
Yes.
And did you ever see the Arvizo kids go into the wine cellar?
I never saw them down in the wine cellar.
Did you ever see them come out of the wine cellar?
No.
Okay. Did you ever have any reports, as house manager, that the Arvizo children were in the wine cellar?
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
Not specifically the Arvizo kids.
Okay. Have you ever served wine or any alcoholic beverage to Mr. Jackson when he was in the presence of children?
Yes, I did.
On more than one occasion?
I would say that was a couple times.
Do you remember any of the children that were with him when you served him alcoholic beverages, or wine, let's say?
I'm not exactly what kids were in there, but I know the Arvizos were there, the kids, and some other kids that were there as well.
Okay. Now, tell me, was there a time when you brought him some wine and 4 glasses?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Okay. Tell me. You said there was a couple of times that you brought Mr. Jackson wine in the presence of children. Tell me about the first one you remember. When was it?
It was at nighttime.
Do you remember when it was in terms of the year that you served as house manager, approximately?
Well, it was. I would say it was January somewhere. January, somewhere around there.
Of 2002, 2003?
2003.
And about what time of night?
I would say it was about 9 o'clock.
And where did you go? What room?
I went to Mr. Jackson's bedroom, upstairs.
And what did you bring to Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
I brought some glasses, and some wine.
What type of wine? Do you remember?
I don't remember the type of wine.
Do you remember whether it was red or white?
I want to say that it was a white wine.
What type of glasses did you bring?
Glass, it was just glass wines.
I'm sorry?
Glass wines.
Wine glass?
No, let me back up. It was just glasses, normal glasses.
Normal glasses?
Yes.
Were they tall glasses or short glasses?
Short glasses.
Can you describe them?
Short glasses.
And who ordered this wine?
Mr. Jackson.
Did you talk to him personally?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He called me and asked me to bring some glasses to his room and some wine.
Did he tell you how many glasses?
Yes.
How many?
4 of them.
All right, so you brought and did you do as he ordered you to do?
Yes, I did.
And when you delivered this wine, did you deliver it to his bedroom?
Yes, I did.
Did you deliver it to the lower portion of his bedroom or the upstairs portion?
Just to the lower portion.
Was Mr. Jackson or any of the children present when you delivered this wine?
Yes, there were.
Who was present?
The kids that were there. Gavin, and I believe it was also Frank's brothers, the ones that were there. But let me tell you something else. He also ordered some sodas with that.
Okay, so what do you mean, some sodas?
He also asked me to bring some sodas with that order.
Tell me what you mean by sodas.
Yes, just the normal soda cans.
Soda drinks?
Yes.
Now, you have previously talked to the sheriffs about this incident, haven't you?
Right.
And described for them that you brought a bottle of wine and glasses?
Uh-huh.
Let me back up. So you brought some wine and glasses and some sodas?
Uh-huh.
Let's move on to the second incident first, okay? Tell me about the second incident. When did that occur?
It was also nighttime.
Nighttime?
Right.
About what time?
That time it was about around 11 o'clock. Somewhere around 11 o'clock.
And was this before or after the incident that you just described?
That was after.
And who placed the order on this occasion?
Mr. Jackson.
And what did he order?
Some more wine.
Okay. Did he also ask for glasses?
Yes.
How many glasses?
This time I believe it was just 1 glass. It was just for him.
Okay. And who was present when you delivered that wine?
I'm not exactly sure who was there, but I believe this time it was himself at night.
But I'm talking about, you said there were 2 times that children were present when you served him. I'm talking about the second time that children were present.
Yeah, that time I'm not exactly who was there. How many of the kids were there?
You're not sure?
No, I'm not sure.
Alright, now, let's go back to this time. This first incident where you said that you served wine and soda. You have been interviewed about this by the sheriff's department, right?
That is correct.
And you were interviewed back in, I believe it was, 2003, is that right?
That's correct.
And when you talked to the sheriff's department about this, you never mentioned anything about any soda?
No, I didn't.
And why is that?
I don't know. It just flip out right now to my mind.
You just remembered it just this second?
Right.
And you said that you came back and the bottle of wine was empty?
That is correct.
Was there any other liquor you brought?
No, that was the second time.
I'm talking about the first time.
No, that was it.
And when you came back, was the bottle empty?
Yes, it was.
Okay. The wine cellar. You said you didn't ever have any complaints hear of any complaints regarding the Arvizos. Did you ever have any other complaints of any other children in the wine cellar?
Yes.
And do you know which children they were?
When I was given those complaints, it was about the kids from Los Olivos.
Okay. If I could have the Elmo again, Your Honor, please. Showing you People's Exhibit 45. Is that one of the kids you're talking about?
Yes.
46?
Yes.
That's one of the kids?
That's correct.
And 47?
That is correct.
Okay. Are there any other kids that you're referring to, or is that everybody that we're talking about?
No, I did get some other complaints about some other kids which wasn't these kids.
Okay. Now, these three kids that I think you've identified them as being from Los Olivos previously, correct?
That's correct.
We'll call them the Los Olivos boys, okay?
Okay.
Now, the Los Olivos boys, you said you had a complaints regarding them in the wine cellar. What was the nature of the complaint?
Objection. Hearsay.
It's offered to explain conduct.
Whose conduct?
Mr. Salas's. And I can tell you at sidebar where I'm going, if you like.
The objection is sustained.
Did you personally ever see the Los Olivos boys in the wine cellar?
Not in the wine cellar, but I saw them come out.
You saw them coming out of the wine cellar. And when you saw them coming out of the wine cellar, what time of day are we talking about?
Early in the morning, around 8 o'clock in the morning.
And during that previous, let's say the 10 hours. Well, let's see, let me back up. Do you know if Mr. Jackson was in the wine cellar with them?
That early morning, or late night, early morning, Mr. Jackson was with the kids.
And when you saw these kids come out of the within cellar, did you notice whether or not they exhibited any signs of being intoxicated?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I did.
Tell me what you saw.
When I saw the boys coming out of the arcade, which is where the wine cellar is, the kids weren't acting normal. So I approached one of them, and I said, "Are you okay?" That's when I noticed that the kids were drunk.
How drunk were they, if you could characterize it?
I would say that they were. What would you call it? I mean, you can tell that they were drunk. I mean, I could see that they had been drinking.
What were they doing that made you believe they'd been drinking?
The way they were acting. I mean, they weren't just normal. Something was wrong with the kids.
Did you notice any other times when these three boys had been drinking, and it was apparent to you that they had been drinking?
Objection. Leading. Relevance. Foundation.
Overruled. You have may answer.
Your question was what date?
No, my question. You've told us about one incident where you noticed the three Los Olivos boys had been drinking. I want to know if you ever observed a second time that these same boys had been drinking.
Yes, there was a second time.
And when was that?
I want to say it was after that one. Not exactly sure, you know, how many weeks after that. But I would say it was 2-3 weeks after that one.
And when was the first time, approximately?
I want to say it was in October when I saw those kids the first time.
2002? 2003? You tell me.
It was 2002, I believe.
Okay. And where did you see these boys the second time when they appeared to have been drinking?
At the house.
Inside the house?
Yes. Well, they were everywhere, but, yes, they were in the house.
Was Mr. Jackson on the property at that time?
Yes, he was.
Had these boys been spending any time with Mr. Jackson that day?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Had you observed whether or not Mr. Jackson had spent any time with these boys earlier that day?
I don't believe that day he spent time with them. They were alone.
Okay. Did you see the boys all, during the entire time they were on the property?
Yes.
You were with them the entire time?
No.
So do you know whether or not they spent time with Mr. Jackson for certain?
Objection. Leading. Foundation.
Argumentative. Sustained.
Okay. So what portion of that day did you spend actually observing the boys? Let me back up. Let me back up. How long were these boys on the property that particular day?
They were there till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock.
At night?
Uh-huh.
Or 1 o'clock in the morning, I guess?
1 o'clock in the morning, yes.
And when did they arrive?
They arrived around noontime.
And how much of that time? So that's about 12 hours, right?
Right.
How many of those hours were they in a place that you could see them, where you were actually seeing them?
Well, they were back and forth, and they were everywhere, so I really didn't have a control of watching them or any of that stuff.
Okay.
But they were back and forth in the house, back at the park, different places.
Do you know where they got their alcohol?
No, I don't.
Were you responsible for cleaning the wine cellar?
Yes.
Did you observe any other incidents where Mr. Jackson was in the wine cellar with children? I mean, did that happen on other occasions? And I'm confining this just to the time you were house manager.
No, I don't.
Do you know? You don't recall any other times?
Not that I can remember.
Okay. Now, during the time that you were house manager, did you ever observe any adult magazines in Mr. Jackson's private quarters?
Yes, I did.
Did these magazines feature nudity?
Yes.
And where were these? Which room were these magazines in?
They were on the first floor on the left side in one of the bathrooms.
Were those magazines there in that bathroom during the time that the Arvizos were at Neverland?
Yes.
Madam Clerk, may I double-check with you? I have 3 items I'm marking. I want to double-check and make sure these numbers haven't been used. 777, 778, and 779.
No, they haven't.
All right, thank you. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Salas, I show you People's Exhibit 777. Can you identify that for me, please?
Yes. These are some statues that were in Mr. Jackson's office.
I show you People's Exhibit 778. Would you please identify that for me?
Yes, they were also in his office.
And People's Exhibit 779?
Yes, that is correct. They were in his office.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell me where these statues were located?
They were located in Mr. Jackson's office. They were placed on different stands.
Were they on display?
Yes.
Over what period of time are we talking about?
Well, they have been there a long time.
Were they there the entire time you were house manager?
Yes.
Were they there during the time that the Arvizos were present on the property?
Yes.
Were they there? Did Mr. Jackson's children ever visit that office?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd like to offer into evidence People's Exhibit 777, 778 and 779 at this time.
No objection.
It's admitted. All 3.
All right. If I may publish these, Your Honor.
All right.
All right. Showing you People's Exhibit 777. Is that an accurate depiction of one of the dolls that you saw in Mr. Jackson's office?
That is correct.
Or statues. Whatever they are. 778, there are 2 photographs there. Do those photographs accurately depict the dolls that were present during the period of time that you were house manager in Mr. Jackson's office?
Yes.
And 779, same questions. Are those accurate depictions of what you observed in Mr. Jackson's office during the time that you were house manager?
That is correct.
All right. Going back to the period of time when the Arvizos were on the property, was there. And I want to talk about the first visit. The first visit in 2003, after you picked up the Arvizos from the airport. You previously testified that they were at Neverland for a period of approximately 2 weeks. Mr. Salas, during that period of time did you observe the Arvizo family to be restricted in any way?
That is correct.
In what way were they restricted?
I believe they weren't allowed to leave Neverland Valley Ranch.
And why do you say that?
Because I had a talk to the mother and she's the one that told me.
Objection. That's hearsay. Move to strike.
Goes to state of mind. Also offered to explain this witness's conduct later.
I will admit it for the limited purpose of explaining the conduct of Jesus. It's not to be used for the truth of the matter asserted by Janet.
All right. So at some point, Did you personally help the Arvizo family to get out of Neverland?
Yes, I did.
How did you do that?
I took them down to LA.
You drove them personally?
Yes, I did.
Did you I take it you used one of Mr. Jackson's cars?
That is correct. I got a phone call from her, and she wanted to talk to me about something.
Objection. Hearsay.
It's offered for the same purpose.
It's non-responsive. Sustained.
Okay. So tell me what precipitated your conduct of helping the Arvizos by taking them off the property. What happened? What was it that made you do that?
Like I said, she called me at my office and wanted to talk to me. So I came over, and I thought it was something that I needed to take care of, in the room. And she asked me to.
Objection. Hearsay, Your Honor.
I'll admit it for the limited purpose again to explain what he's doing, not for the truth of the matter that she asserted.
So she asked me, she told me if I can drive them down to LA, that she wanted to leave the property. So I asked her, what's the reason? Why do you want to leave the property? She was very.
Same objection.
Sustained after he started on another subject.
Okay. Can you tell me what her emotional state was at the time?
She was very upset.
How was she demonstrating that she was upset?
Crying.
What time of the day or evening are we talking about here when this happened?
We're talking about nighttime.
Nighttime?
Yes.
Did she express any fear while you were talking to her?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
When you were talking to her, did she appear to be fearful of something?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Tell me about any other expressions of emotion that she had, if you noticed any.
Well, she looks very preoccupied. She wasn't comfortable there. She just wanted to leave the property.
All right, let's take our break.